Go back now. Right, evening guys, and welcome to another Cofi Network. After my little rant, I will hand over to Andy to introduce himself, tell us what he does, and tell us how he's going to help us. Over to you, Andy.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rob. So hi everyone. And for those of you I haven't met before, my name's Andy, and I'm going to talk about knowing the information in within your business, but more importantly, how to use it and what that can then mean for you and for business growth. So the reason I want to talk about this is because I think there's many business owners are sort of working incredibly hard, but and revenue might even be growing, but they're still making important decisions without truly knowing what's going on inside their business. And that lack of clarity creates pressure and it often holds businesses back without the owner really realizing why. And so I want to talk to you as business owners and hopefully demonstrate why, even when you have opportunities and want to grow, something might be stopping that from happening. So I think just talk a little bit about the reality for many growing businesses. So most business owners started the business because they're brilliant at something, expert in their field, but that something probably wasn't the numbers. And as a result of that, finance can often sit in the background. It's not always the case that, there are lots of business owners that either do have a finance background or feel, very comfortable with the numbers. But in a lot of cases, business owners can be sort of burying the head in the sand somewhat with the numbers. And that is a problem. It means they're not always using the information that is at their fingertips and kind of making decisions with only part of the picture. So often just relying on gut feel rather than actually using that information that's available to them. And business owners will usually have some sort of plan, but they may not have then something solid that sits underneath it. And they might not know whether they're on track with that plan either. And that, yeah, that is a concern. I think that can hold back growth. And so I just wanted to talk about some of the kind of common situations that you might resonate with or sort of things to watch out for in the business that might indicate that this is happening in your business, kind of symptoms, if you like. So it could be a situation where you feel that revenue's growing, but cash still feels very tight. And sometimes business owners will find that they're making revenue. That revenue might not be translating into profit, and it might not be translating into cash either. And that is a situation that many business owners face and are not quite sure why that's happening. And they may have hesitation around some of the decisions in the business because some of the financial impact isn't that clear. So a few different examples. So maybe if we think about pricing, so there's a business I've been working with who are they are they're currently re-looking at their pricing because they don't really have a good handle actually on what the costs are for them to deliver in their case, the products that they sell. And that has led to pricing too low because not really necessarily understood the costs that are going into those products. And it's not that obviously, businesses will not always just price based on the costs. It should be based on the value as well that they're delivering to the customer, of course. But without that understanding of the costs that are involved in selling that product, it makes it really hard to know whether you're actually making any money on those products. And also when you're having those discussions with customers on pricing, if you don't know what sits underneath in terms of the cost, then again, it can feel not, you don't really feel in a good place when you're having those discussions. I think hiring is another area. So maybe if you're looking to hire a new person or a new team, you obviously know that there is a benefit from you've got an idea of why you want to hire that person, but it might not always be clear what that financial benefit and sort of weighing up the different options and whether you can afford that. So you'll know perhaps what the bank balance is currently, but you may not know what that's going to be in a few months' time and whether you can sort of make that decision to take on that person and whether there is a return from doing that. And then I think kind of another example as well would be around investment. So that could be either in getting investment into the business and whether that is necessary and whether that's a good idea or not, but also as a business investing in, say, new physical premises um, or new machinery, perhaps if it's a manufacturer. And it's but if you don't have that understanding of what is the impact of that decision, it can make that decision quite difficult to make. Coming back to some of the other sort of common situations you might recognize in here, when you've got different products and services and clients, not knowing which of those are actually profitable can be a big problem. You might find that overall it's okay, you're kind of making money, hopefully, and you sort of on the whole, that the business is profitable, but you may not know that, say, if you've got four or five different services or products, say, it may be that one of them is doing really well and the rest aren't, and that one is paying for the others. But if you're not looking at the information in that way, you wouldn't necessarily know that, and you wouldn't be able to establish whether, which are the products that are making the money. Um, but when you know that, you can, if you know that, say there's a couple that are maybe just breaking even, if you can't do something about those, whether you can do something on the price of those products or services or reduce the cost to deliver them, unless that offering is doing something else in your business, maybe to attract customers in to sell some of your other services and products, then there's no point really continuing with that product. And it may not be a case of, it might not be losing money. Maybe, as I say, it might be breaking even, but you could make the same money and life could be a lot easier because you'd be probably working very hard on some of these products and services that perhaps aren't actually profitable. And it's not always obviously the ones that are the highest price necessarily. It's the ones that are actually making a profit, and then once you know about that, you can kind of do something about it. And then I think another thing really is about being able to see ahead. So quite a lot of businesses will get financial surprises. So things will pop up that they hadn't expected because they weren't necessarily looking ahead and planning ahead. So perhaps late payments from customers, or maybe a tax bill that you hadn't planned for, or just other spend that you hadn't kind of considered ahead that was going to be required. And that can happen and kind of take businesses by surprise, and they kind of don't have options then for what they can do about it when these financial surprises pop up. And ultimately, when a big opportunity comes along, instinct can drive that decision rather than it being based on sort of what the numbers are telling you, and that can be quite risky. And without the right insight, years can be spent underperforming, and the information is there, but there's no one necessarily in the business or showing the business owner kind of what that means. The that kind of has an impact though on when you're operating without that clarity. It is a bit deeper than just kind of some of the financial impact, because when a business owner doesn't truly know what's going on financially, there's quite a few impacts on them. So decisions can feel a lot heavier because there's doubt. Maybe they're not, it's difficult to make decisions promptly or confidently, and it can just make them really hard because you're kind of not quite sure how to weigh up the different options, and you can sort of be relying on guesswork a little bit rather than what the numbers are actually telling you. And then growth can feel quite risky rather than exciting. So when these opportunities come along, it should feel exciting to be able to think, well, can I take a calculated risk, but take a risk and pursue this opportunity or not? And that, if you don't have that clarity, then you're not quite sure maybe whether you can do that or not. And as I've kind of alluded to already around sort of problems appearing, but they can sometimes appear too late. And often when it happens quite late, then you can't really do anything about it, or maybe your options for doing, taking action are limited. And I'll talk about an example shortly that might bring that to life a little bit more. But really, there's just going to be a bit of a constant background worry about cash flow, and ultimately doubt creeps in, and you can lose confidence in yourself and in the business. And that lack of confidence can lead you to take decisions that aren't very sensible for the business. So I can show a specific example later if we have time, but there's a bit of maybe a good example of this is in discounting. So there is a bit of a counterintuitive relationship between price and volume, which some people will get, but some people won't necessarily realize. So if you discount, let's say you discount one of your products or services by 10%, let's say, it can take a monumental increase in volume to pay for that discount to actually recover what you were earning. Sometimes even if in a low margin product, you could, let's say you drop the price by 10%, you might have to increase the volume by 200% just to make the same money that you were making before. And so all you've really done is made yourself busier, but with less income. And so that, I say, I can sort of show you that if that doesn't make sense, sort of show you that with some figures later if necessary. But really, when a business owner makes decisions based on guesswork alone, costly mistakes can often follow ultimately. So you might take on work that makes you poorer, you might hire too early, you might price too low, or just commit to costs that really can't be sustained by the business. But I don't say all this to scare you because the numbers aren't actually as complicated as I think sometimes it can seem. And there's certainly a tendency, or amongst some finance people, I think, to kind of overcomplicate some of this and kind of use jargon and terminology that maybe doesn't help to explain what's going on. But ultimately, if you capture in the right information and then having it organized and explained, organized in the right way and explained clearly, then this stuff can become a lot clearer quite quickly. And then when a business owner truly understands financial position of the business, it can create a shift in a few different areas. So you kind of know the impact before you commit to a decision. So it's, as I said, it's kind of based on confidence rather than guesswork. For example, I was working with a founder of a startup who didn't have a really clear view of what each of the different options for their business models would deliver or the investment required. They had quite a few options that they could take with this knowledge they were developing in the business, and they weren't quite sure where to take it. But once we kind of modeled the options, they had that clarity and the confidence then to commit to the right approach, and they could sort of see, you know, confidently make that decision, knowing what those options were. And then you have the ability to plan ahead and just be a bit more in control of the business. And you're kind of one step ahead because you're spotting these problems then while there are still good options on the table, and then you can solve them before they become a crisis. And that can kind of help really just to kind of quieten some of that background worry about the business. And the sooner a business owner has the right foundations and a clear plan, the sooner they feel in control over where the business is heading. And more importantly, they know where to focus their time and energy and know where the biggest return is really for spending their time, and they can focus on leading the business, but knowing that they're spending their time on the things that are really moving the needle, and it can just give a lot more headspace really. And when all of that comes together, running the business, I think just feels different. So it might be worth just talking about a bit of an example here. So this is maybe it's a specific example, but it's kind of quite a common sort of experience that businesses can have. So there was a business I was working with who had they're profitable contracts, but they were quite long-term contracts, and they'd recently grown, taken on some bigger deals, and they were focused on the margins on those contracts, which was great. So they had a really, a good understanding of that, but they weren't really focused on the cash flow in the business. So they'd kind of always had enough cash, didn't feel like they ever really needed to focus that much on, they'd never put a cash flow forecast together. And they were growing now, but they hadn't really felt the need to do this before. Cash had always sort of been okay for them, and they'd felt that they could kind of not quite get away with it, but it was something that wasn't really a concern in the business previously. And they took on these bigger contracts. They had some more costs up front. The payment was towards the end of the contract, and that cash gap was much larger than they dealt with previously. And once we sort of put a forecast in place, it became clear that they would have actually run out of cash within 3 months based on those, where they were heading. And fortunately, we spotted it while there was still time to act. And in their case, they were able to act. They were able to. What it did was basically they gave the customers a small discount. I wouldn't normally encourage it, as I've already said, but in this case, it was necessary just to secure some earlier payment effectively. So they were able to. Fortunately, the customer had the cash and they were happy to get a bit of a discount. Um, and the business that I was working with managed to, the margins took a small hit, but ultimately they were able to keep going. And the point really being that a simple forecast being in place helped them to spot that. And if it hadn't have been, and it hadn't realized early enough, then that it could have been a different story. So I think there are a number of reasons why businesses like this can appear successful on the surface, but they can feel quite tight on cash. And just talk through a few of those reasons and examples really. So businesses, I think, can quite often not truly know what is theirs. So they will know the bank balance, but they may not know what's owed to HMRC, for example, and what's owed to suppliers, and maybe what's already been committed in costs in, going forward, that actually that bank balance, because the cash is there, but because they don't quite know whether they can spend it or not, they maybe don't, or they do but worry about it. And I think another example would be around not understanding necessarily the timing of the cash that moves through the business. So if we take an example of maybe like a manufacturing business or a retailer maybe that holds stock, they might buy in stock, maybe pay for that 30 days later, perhaps. That would then sit there perhaps for let's say a month, or maybe 2 months, and then they sell it, hopefully, and then get payment from their customer again, maybe 30 days later. And that gap can be, that elapsed time can be quite long. And also some of the timings in the business through that cycle, but also just other costs that are ongoing within the business can be quite unpredictable if you're not focused and understanding clearly what the timing of those cash flows are. And so, you might end up you could hold too much stock, for example, as well in that situation. So cash is kind of tied up. So the business is doing well and making money, but actually you've got too much stock sat there and the cash is tied up and you can't then ultimately do something in the business with that. And then similar impact, slightly different example is maybe around collecting cash from customers. So I know that there's always a balance and you don't want to necessarily be too aggressive with chasing payment. However, with your payment terms, and usually they're called customer payment terms, but really they're your payment terms. But when someone pays late, even a day late, really that customer is dictating then the payment terms, and they really are the customer payment terms at that point because they're they're kind of dictating to you when you get paid. And so it's important to be on top of this and making sure you've got things in place that ensure you're following up, and reminders that, and it's someone's responsibility in the business to actually chase up this cash, and particularly when it goes overdue, that is being pursued, and then that cash can be brought back into the business, and something can be done with it. It can be used to invest in the business. And these situations are quite common, but I think having that clarity makes all the difference, really. And in the case of that business owner I talked about, for them, just knowing it was a massive step in the right direction. And they said that it was way worse than they thought it was, but they said, even though it was worse, they felt they could sleep at night because they knew the situation, and they knew that they could do something about it. So knowing, even when it's uncomfortable, it can mean that you can act, and often and hopefully with enough time to do something about it. So moving on from that, I just want to talk a little bit about where some of the and explain where some of the different finance roles in a business fit, which not everyone may know the difference between them. So I think the first step is having that information available in the business. So this is where bookkeepers and accountants are incredibly important, those roles, because a bookkeeper kind of ensures that all the information is recorded properly and structured correctly. And then your accountant will then keep you compliant with HMRC and report what's happened, and may help you, with VAT returns and payroll and all this, the important sort of compliance and support that the accountant can help with. But although, I mean, I know lots of brilliant accountants, and it's a really important job in the business. And often the accountant will be providing some advice as well, which is great, and lots do. Often that is around probably more related to kind of tax related advice, and maybe around the business structure or dividend payments and things like that. Some will provide a bit more insight into the numbers, and perhaps will provide some sort of monthly accounts, which is great if you're looking at the numbers every month. But really, the role of the accountant only goes so far, and really kind of need to be thinking about how does that information then get used to actually run the business better. So great to be compliant, and business owners often, will get reports from their accountant, but they're not necessarily the answers that they need. And they're kept compliant, but they're still left not really knowing what to do in some cases. So there's kind of then an extra sort of role that can help with kind of the more strategic advice, if you like. So that would be finance director or FD, or some business will call it chief financial officer, CFO. If you go back kind of maybe 10 plus years, those roles were typically only in much larger or larger SMEs, say maybe 20 million turnover and above, for example, where they would bring someone in house and have them, full time or a few days a week. But now businesses that are smaller than that can get access to that, and I'm sure people are familiar with kind of model with you can do the same with marketing support and HR support, and you can get that on a kind of fractional basis. And this is what I do, and this helps businesses to look forward a bit more and plan ahead. And it's really focused on kind of the decisions and the actions that need to be taken in the business. But I would say anyway that you should always try and get more out of your accountant, if you're your existing accountant, if and these are separate roles, the accountant and the FD, but where you're not getting proactive support, then ask for more. Go and ask some questions of your accountant, just to start to get just to get it sort of into the numbers, and really, and just getting used to looking at them. And it just, you can pick something from your accounts that you don't really understand, and just starting that conversation with the accountant and they'll probably be more than happy to help, to explain some of that. And I think there are a number of situations where people can get a lot more from their accountant. But some businesses are just kind of at the point of needing a bit more than is reasonable to expect probably from the accountant. And a few of the sort of maybe signs that that might be the case where perhaps the existing support in the business is on the finance side is feels sort of no longer appropriate. So perhaps if you're making kind of bigger decisions that it feels like bigger decisions from previously, so you might be growing, and so some of the decisions might be around growth or hiring, or as I talked about earlier, investing or expanding the business in some way. And the support can help to just think through those decisions. Also around investing, so investment in the business, I mean here, so sort of getting funding. So that might be either looking for to potentially raise funds to get investors on board, or maybe it's to borrow money. But either way, you kind of need to be able to have that financial story able to be articulated, because business owners, then very passionately can describe their business and what their business is all about, but it's being able to actually articulate the financial story as well that goes alongside that. And particularly if you're looking to get investment, then those two need to be kind of in lockstep, really. And then the other, if you do already have investors on board, then there's often kind of a thirst for information from the investors. So it can help just to be able to answer some of those questions. And in any case, it's really important to do some of this stuff for yourself anyway. Sometimes I think people would look to get a bit more support because someone else is asking the questions, but it's important to ask the questions of yourself as well and make sure that you understand the numbers. But I recognize that time is, short, and business owners are really busy. And often you kind of know that you need to look at the finances, but you can't really dedicate the time. And that's again where some of that extra support can just help with structuring, looking at those numbers and making sure it does happen every month, and just having a bit of an independent sounding board really to so that you kind of don't feel on your own with it anymore. So just I think got a couple of minutes left. So I just wanted to give you a few final thoughts really. So if you don't know where you're heading, then how can you start to plot a path to get there? And unlocking some of this information is what gives you that direction, really. And I would urge you to make friends with the numbers in your business. And so, take time if you can, to review them each month, ask your accountant questions, and then, at the right point, consider getting additional support. But really, it's about using the information when you're making the decisions and having that in your mind of what that information may be telling you. And in short, just don't just bury your head in the sand with it if that's something that you feel that you're doing at the moment. And I do think once a business owner truly understands what's happening, then decisions become a lot easier, and then growth kind of becomes a lot more intentional rather than maybe accidental. And some of this doubt and worry can fall away, and you feel like you've got much more confidence that the actions that you're taking are the right ones for the business. So I just want to leave you with three questions. You don't need to answer them to the group, but just kind of to think about, just to reflect on really. So when you're making a big decision in the business, do you tend to go with your gut feel, or do you look to the numbers to see what that's telling you about that decision? Do you know which of your products or services or clients are most profitable? And like I said, this isn't the one that's paying the most, but which is making you the most profit and which is the least profitable? And do you know what your cash position will be in 3 months' time, or is likely to be? And how much of that will be yours? It's just a few things to just think about and reflect on, and how you feel about those in your business. And that's it for me. Yeah, so thanks for listening. I hope it's been useful, and happy to take any questions, or if people have any thoughts on that want to talk through, happy to talk through that.
Thanks, Andy. That's brilliant. And
Okay.
if there's anyone got any questions on your numbers, I see Crystal's taken her mute button off.
I just need to get on and do it. Like James got
Yeah.
me to a point where I've done fairly well. And I've just given her my accounts for 2023. I did it ages ago. I just lost it. Then I found it because I'm clearing up all of that stuff. But I find getting on top of it, I find it a real chore, if I'm being honest. I find it really, really hard. But when I get into the numbers, I don't get excited. I'm like, now I know where I've been spending all my money. And it feels good to kind of know. But yeah, I think actually having a plan for the next 3 months is a good idea, really. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think it is difficult to put that time aside, because it's sort of it is something you can, for a period, you can get away with without doing
Mm.
it. And but I think, and then sometimes it does seem, quite complex. I understand that, when you some of it's buried in the numbers, but if you can take that time, and if it sounds like you've got someone that can support you doing that, that's really good. If you just put that in your diary, even if it's starting once a month, half an hour or something, just to get into that routine of looking at it weekly, ideally. But but it's on top. I realize it's on top of everything, but it is fundamentally going to impact the success of your business. So it's another priority, I understand, but it is a real crucial one.
What are the biggest mistakes you've seen people make with their numbers? Is it like the self-belief that they've got way more money than they actually have?
Yeah, I think there is that particular, so sort of just, I mean, at an extreme end, it's kind of, you've been paid, you haven't paid the VAT bill yet, you haven't paid your corporation tax bill, and some business owners will spend that money because it's there and it's sat there, and not quite sure, or thinking about whether it's kind of theirs to spend. And then, a couple of months down the line, when they've got the tax bill, the money isn't there. And I think fundamentally it's kind of, they're the worst ones, probably, where it's just kind of, not, just not paying attention to it, really, I think. But it's really what I said about kind of burying your head in the sand a bit, where it's almost easier not to look at it. And I think that's it's actually, although it's a bit daunting to start with, but if you do look at it, it can, it can feel like you're a bit more in control. Um, so I'd say it's probably around that, and just not really looking at it. And also the kind of what I said, I think, around pricing. If you don't understand your costs, it's difficult to price accordingly. Um, and understanding, that portfolio of products and services that you've got, which are making money. And so, seeing businesses that have got products that weren't profitable, but they were, and it's difficult as well. I reckon, particularly if it's a particular product or service that is really important to you. It's kind of you're very passionate about it, and it's, maybe it's a bit of a flagship product, and I think that's difficult to hear that information. But I think those are some of the areas where people can struggle, and ultimately kind of make mistakes.
Because some of the guys, well, I sat down with them, like with Crystal and stuff, and I actually said to them, "You actually know your numbers." And when they say know your numbers, I go, literally your numbers. I goes, "You're making a product." I said, "You've costed your product." It goes, "But what most of them don't do, and is factor in their time for
Yeah,
making that product."
yeah.
So what they say is that cost me £1 to make. So I sold it for £2. And my question was, but what about your time? The profit is the profit, but there's still about time you put into that product to make it as well. There's all elements of time in what you do, and you can't get that time back afterwards either. So, so for them and stuff, sometimes it's not looking at. the things you can see, it's the things you can't see. And things sometimes you get like, shipping costs. Oh yeah, but you've got shipping costs. You've got to buy a box. You've got to buy wrapping paper. And
Yeah. Yeah. Factor
it
all that
doesn't,
in. Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't seem like a lot, but once you get bigger, you're talking very large numbers, aren't you, on what's going on? And it is quite it's quite a strange one. And I think a lot of one of the things I've learned about what we've done is this is we've been learned we went to school, okay? We learned to read and write, we learned to walk first of all, we learned to read and write, but someone helped us do all this stuff. We all start a business, and all of a sudden we all believe we know what we're doing with no one actually telling us how to have done it, and we run off at a tangent. And generally it's a few years down the road before we go, do you know what? I should have got some help 2 years ago when I started, because now I'm having to catch up with what I've done wrong in the past, and then try and now I've got all these bad habits. I've got to get rid of my bad habits and go forward the correct way now with the right habits. And I don't know why at school they don't actually teach you do like a lesson for business studies to understand some
Yeah,
basic numbers.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Financial acumen and yeah, yeah, there's a lot that could be added into the curriculum there. I think it's a really good point as well, Rob, about factoring your time, because I think people don't think about that either. Sometimes people will, maybe if they're actually involved in making the product or delivering it, they're not factoring in that time because it's kind of, well, I'll just do that. It's not cost, there's no money going out of the business necessarily, so you don't really treat it as a cost as such. But also just how you spend your time generally, I think is important to think about, and almost like think what your time is worth for an hour, and then think about the tasks maybe that you've spent this week and everything, all those things that you spent an hour on. Was that worth it? I don't know. Let's pick a number. Let's say it's £100 an hour. What is that task that you did? Was that £100 an hour value for doing that task? And I think it's kind of thinking about where you're spending your time and factoring that into the business decisions as well, like you say, Rob.
It's because sometimes I watch these programs on telly where people make things, artists and stuff, and I can't work out how they cost them because the amount of time they put in to the cost they charge doesn't equate to what they're giving out. I mean, if
Mm.
it's someone 5 days to do a painting for me, I'd expect to spend thousands, not hundreds, for that painting. I just would because that's the time. I mean, my business is different. I'm obviously I develop software, so you can't see the product. Now, I get a lot of clients who want to have weekly meetings. So I say, not a problem. That's £250 an hour. And they go, for what? I go, for my time. They go, you want me to pay to go to meetings? I said, yeah. I goes, or you're saying to me that you think my time is worthless. That's
Mm.
what you're saying to me by saying to me, you want me to sit in a 2 hour meeting every week while you wrap it on. I sit, listen to you, and then I've then got to go away and try and get back those 2 hours. I said, no. I said, that's not how it works in the real world. I said, I'll go to any meeting you want me to. I'm going to charge you for it. And if I've got to travel to them, I'm going to charge you for travel, and I'm going to charge you while I'm traveling for that time. And they go, why? I go, because that's the way it is. Don't like it. I'm not going to them. I go, you don't. And also I keep saying, it's this the way people see you and they say, but it's only time. But the thing is, like I said, is time can't feed me. I'd love it to and stuff, but it can't and stuff. And I think sometimes with what we do with our numbers is we put all these figures in place, but then we treat ourselves as being like a second class citizen in our own business because we're too scared to put our cost on in case it's too high. That's what I found and stuff, and that should never be a worry in any business. The product cost is the product cost. I mean, we found out for our own, we're actually launching a product ourselves, and we spoke to somebody, and they told us we were about 300% too cheap. When we asked them why, they said because when you build a digital system, see, Crystal, if you if you charge less than something like £35 to use that system per month, in the people's eyes, it's not a real system. So it's not, most systems aren't based on how much money you want to make. It's based on the perception you're giving of your product. I think I saw a thing somewhere where there's Rolls-Royce stopped doing car shows and started taking their cars to plane and boat shows. So it goes, 1 minute you've got £500,000 car next to a £50 million yacht. That car's cheap. But at a car show, it's expensive. It's all relative to how you see things. And as business owners, we should look at that and go, do you know what? Um, People will pay more for a good product. And like I said earlier on, someone says, "Oh yeah, but if I'm cheaper," but you're right. If you're cheaper, you've got to sell more. But if you charge, I mean, I've seen people will charge £20 for a jar of jam, handmade jam. Okay, they'll sell loads. Somebody else will be a fraction of the price, but that means they've got to, because it's whether you the jam takes the same amount of time to make, but it's how you package it and give it out to people. So that person's got to sell one to make £15. This person's got to sell five to make £15. So you're right. It's the amount of effort you've got to put in. Once you've discounted it down to sell it on, is yeah. I never thought of it that way. Discounting means more work.
Yeah, yeah, that's if you can even make as much as you were making before, because often, like I say, on particularly on low margin products, it's so if the margins are thin already, you've not really got much room to move on it, and if you do give a discount, you've just got to sell so many more to make that money back. It can, but it feels like the right thing to do. So, oh, I'm going to sell more, so that it must outweigh the decision to drop the price. But it's really hard to achieve that. You've got to get so much more to do that.
So afterwards, we're gonna if you drop all your details into the
Yeah,
chat, just
yeah.
go. Have you got a link to the WhatsApp group? I'll
No.
invite you into. Right, I'll invite you into it now. Okay, just
Okay,
go just
cool.
go into that. Okay, and just drop your details in.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll then, when this video record stops finishing, I will basically then load this up into YouTube and then
Okay.
reload it,
Yeah.
and then the group will then rewatch it afterwards. But then you can go and watch it there. All the talks I've had done, even on some of my ones, are all on a YouTube channel. And the
Okay.
good thing is
Great.
they're all different as well. And it's just giving the hardest thing about being a small business owner is what I describe as getting proper impartial advice, Andy. What that
Yeah.
means is normally is if the person giving you advice is giving you a cost and they are going to financially benefit from that cost, is
Mm.
that advice really impartial?
Yeah.
As a salesperson, you've got to be a bit, to try and get them to buy things. And I think, and that's the key. And I think what you're right with numbers is right and stuff. And so, do you work with any size companies? Is it literally one little startups all the way through?
It tends to be, I think the best value is when they've kind of grown to a certain size that there's maybe a bit more complexity in the numbers. So certainly, I think with employees, with some employees in the business or some sort of complexity to the business model. But so typically from sort of 500,000 turnover up, and it kind of is maybe the size where businesses start to grow to the point of getting a bit more, support than they get just from the accountant. And then often once you get to like 10, 15, 20 million turnover, people would then benefit from an in-house, you know, several days a week dedicated support. But I think in the rest of, in the rest of that sort of gap is where I can help, because I think there's and depending on it's different with different businesses. Also work with a startup as well, so it can kind of it's different challenges maybe, but the same premise of it's just trying to get the insight out of the numbers and what is it telling us to do, and what are the different options we've got, and what's the potential impact of those, and just getting sort of having a bit more control, I guess, over the direction, and a bit more confidence in those decisions, because you kind of know it's based on something a bit more solid.
Because I think what most small business owners miss is that every business out there started as one person.
Mm,
They all did. Every single
yeah,
business. You don't start a business with 100 people. It's somebody with an idea. They start a business and they grow from there. And that's the key. And I think sometimes what we do is we look at the business people now, but don't look at how they got there and the stress and the strain they went through to basically get to where they are. And I think that's the key. Most businesses tend to fail because people's mindset changes. and they go into a I can't approach, or numbers aren't right, or the money's not right, or they expect to make profit instantly when in businesses that's not how businesses that's not how businesses work in the real world. In an ideal world, you see a business and the profit margin goes like that straight away. That's very rare to see. When you first start. I mean, you could make a small bit, but you're generally putting things back into the business to grow it. Okay, listen, thank you for that,
I
Andy.
think Rob,
That was great.
on that point as well, I think it's kind of it can be difficult as well to, as you say, you started as one person, you start to grow a bit, maybe a couple of years in, and it's difficult to know sometimes like what is the right point to start to get extra help and it because certain approaches that have served the business in its earlier stage might not be appropriate any longer, but it is quite, there's not it's not like there's a point where it's like, now I've tipped into the point of needing that support. So there is that grey area of thinking of, is now the time actually that the business feels like it's moved kind of onto the next stage, or there's a particular big decision around it, and is that the time to take on extra, help with getting some of the insight into these numbers.
Oh yeah, no, it is, and it's just it's that knowing when, isn't it? It's that magic when. When do
Yeah,
I do it? Is it the right time now? Can I afford to do it now? Can I not afford to do it now? And it's
yeah,
just it's just that fine it's that fine balance, isn't it, between when because everyone goes through an evolution in a
yeah.
business, and it's
And
and it's at which point you jump on and go, I need some help.
yeah, and the idea is that you get more back than it costs you. There's a financial benefit to the business, but obviously there's an affordability as well of being able to have the cash to do it. But the benefit is there. But as you say, it's the right it's picking that right time to sort of move that on to the next phase, basically.
Oh no, definitely. No, definitely. Listen, thanks for that. I must admit, I've got some bits down here to do as well. Okay. With what I do. It's always the same, isn't it? Yeah. Numbers, numbers, and more numbers. Hopefully going upwards and not downwards is the key, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Listen, guys. 8:25, perfect timing. Listen, thanks again, Andy, for doing that. Okay.
No
I'll
problem.
give this system about an hour to render properly, then I can get the recording from it, and I'll basically um load that up as well. Okay. And just I'll send you a link in a minute, Andy, to the WhatsApp group. Okay, so you can pop into
Brilliant.
that as well. And then it's just a
Yeah.
matter of um having a look, getting people to just you might get a few questions through. I think
Yeah, sure. Happy to answer any
there is
questions.
there's definitely a couple of people in the group that have been expanding recently, and I think
Mhm.
they might need a bit of guidance as they expand because they're starting to take on staff as well,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is a
I'm happy to have
massive.
a
And that's
chat
a
if people find it useful, just to feel free to put questions in the group, or we can have a call and have a chat. That's absolutely fine.
when you start employing staff, it is a massive leap, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I think
With
that's when it sort of starts to become a bit more complex,
it
really,
does, and I've
often.
just added you to um 1 second. Does that work? Yeah, just added you to the WhatsApp group.
Great. Yeah, I've got that. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'll put my
cool.
details
Okay,
in
and
there.
you'll see there's quite a few people in there. It's like each Thursday. It depends who can get home on time from work. There's another problem, isn't it? You're a working business owner. It's just, it's just, if you're a new business owner, it means you're working and running a business. Once you start doing it full time, you end up. Your belief is you'll do less hours. You end up doing 10 times as many hours as you was doing before because it'll get nodded away. And
Yeah.
that's just part of the course, isn't it? As we grow. So yeah. But listen, guys, listen, everyone have a nice evening. Okay.
You
Yeah,
too.
and yeah, and any questions you can fire them into the group chat, okay, guys, on WhatsApp. Okay? Right, guys and guys, listen, everyone have a nice weekend. Okay, and it's same time next week, and it looks like, oh, you're lucky, you got me again on my own. So I will find something to talk about. Hopefully I'll make it interesting, okay? Right then, guys. Good
Excellent.
night,
Thanks
guys.
all. Take care.
Thank you.